Good evening. Welcome. Welcome to the School of Visual Arts. Welcome to the MFA in Design Criticism. I'm Alice Twemlow, Chair of the department. Just in time. Nice. Can someone help get this lady a seat? Okay. All right. And welcome to our lecture series. We're almost halfway through our urban safari adventure. Tonight we're stopping at the intersection of graphic design, research, and urbanism, which is an intersection we like to hang out at, a place to examine the ways in which graphic design explains, improves, intensifies, or provides escape from the urban environment we live in. And we've actually been visited by other designers and thinkers and researchers around that intersection, Interborough Partners, Damon Rich, Meredith Tenhor, Projects, Michael Rock, among many others. And coincidentally, they're all colleagues of tonight's speaker, as am I, which is one of the reasons I'm extremely happy to be introducing Glen Cummings to you all, and to be welcoming him back to DCrit, because he's been a guest crit here in the past. Now, as the students sitting in the front row know, I don't invite many designers to speak at this lecture series. I feel there are plenty of venues in the city where you can go get a fantastic graphic design show and tell. The ones I do invite are those that have a little something extra. No pressure, Glen. Often they write, teach, research, or push their design work towards its critical edge. And sometimes they do all of those. Glen Cummings was formerly guitarist for the speed metal band Ludicrous. I told you he had a little something extra. These days, he's partner and creative director at Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, which is often shortened, whose publications, Environmental Graphics and Identity Systems, are very often produced in collaboration with partners in other disciplines. He works a lot with architects, industrial designers, and urban planners. Glen got his MFA in graphic design from Yale University School of Art, where he's also a visiting critic. And from 2002 to 2008, he was an art director at 2x4, that's here in New York City, where he led lots and lots of glamorous projects. Right now, he's here, and we're all anxious to hear from the man himself. So please welcome narrative builder, information framer, and good old graphic designer, Glen Cummings. Are you...
That was great. I'm so unused to introductions, so it's like so flattering that I don't know what to do. So hi. I'm all those things. Yes, it is exactly true. So this week I realized that I would be a lot more articulate if I wrote my little introductions on my iPhone and then read them sometimes. So I have like one paragraph to kind of read, and then that's going to be excruciating, and then we'll kind of go in. I'll show you a lot of pictures, and it'll be much more interesting. So I'm going to present a few projects that suggest one long-term project the studio's involved in, and we'll call that negotiating urban nature for the time being. A studio project that extends through multiple design projects, multiple situations, clients, and collaborators, but somehow has been birthed collectively from them. A project defined as much by the conversations and relationships as by the designed work that it results in. In these projects, I think the studio is trying to find a way of working that's unashamed of using design as a way to learn or as a way to kind of find form. And that is kind of trying to find ways around the predetermined relationships that clients and collaborators and designers somehow find themselves gravitating magnetically towards and locked into. So I'd say this thread of urban nature is one of many threads that after 5 years of practice, have just sort of emerged organically from the body of collaborators and clients that we've had. Another one is kind of to deal with housing, like contemporary issues in housing. We never started out as like, wow, we have to start a studio to like engage housing. It's kind of like we more found a collaborator and a client that did something really interesting, and then the next person saw that, and we got more interested in it, and it kind of snowballed. And now we find ourselves with multiple snowballs rolling down the hill in different directions, and one of them is kind of urban nature. So that was the talking part of the show. I'm going to show you 3 projects, but I probably could show you about 8 or 9 or 12 projects that somehow have to do with urban nature that we're involved in. But I'm going to show you 3 or 4, I forgot. So the first one is a kind of self-starter project. It's called Safari 7. It's together with Jeanette Kim and Kate Orff, Jeanette's an academic up at Columbia. She runs the urban landscape lab. She also now runs a research department. Kate Orff has a studio called Scape that is a landscape design studio, but she's involved in a lot of urban projects as well. So this project started out as a grant proposal. Like we were just kind of sitting around, let's do a grant proposal together. And the proposal was to use the 7 line. So that's the purple one. Do you guys ride the 7 lines? Anybody ride? Like, a little bit. Okay. You took it once. You should try it again. It gets better as you do. My family's from Flushing here, so I have a particular love for the 7 line. We decided to use the 7 line as a transect, as a line to talk about urban nature. So the idea was, if you go to Busch Gardens or you go to kind of like Epcot Center, there are these cars you ride in, like trams you ride in, and they ride through in like a wonderful environment where you learn about things. And we thought, well, let's just use the 7 train. Everybody's on it anyway, sweating, looking out the window, and there's actually some really amazing stuff out the window as far as the environments that the 7 goes through. This is sort of a little bit of a loaded deck, right? Because this is such a great, to me, is such a great image. There's kind of one of the, I don't know if that's the Van Wyck or the Grand Central. It's as you're coming into Flushing, you have this kind of wetlands, you have kind of all this stuff intersecting. This is a really easy way to understand urban nature, right? Like that urban nature isn't like there's a city and then over there is a park. That's urban and that's nature. Urban nature is like, actually, there's all sorts of stuff interweaved between the 2 things. And the 7 is a way to kind of just use this line in between things to talk about multiple instances of that. So urban nature. Anybody know these things? You guys are all New Yorkers now, at least. A what? A falcon, yeah. He's on somebody's balcony, so there's lots of falcons in the city. What about this thing in the net? Trout? Ooh, catfish. You guys are from New York. That's a snakehead fish. Does anybody know what that is? Oh God, look it up. It's amazing. It's this invasive species. I think either from Korea or Japan. It can walk on the land. It can breathe air, and it basically invades different ponds by walking to the next pond. And it basically eats everything. It eats all the other fish. It eats frogs, and it's in a lot of the waterways around. Like somebody flushed one or whatever, and now it's like taking over the waterways around LaGuardia. These things, you know what those are? Rat holes. Yeah. Oh my God, you've seen that. And then kind of these different bird habitats / infestations that happen in different parts of the city. So urban nature is all around us. Like it doesn't have to be as exciting as the snakehead fish or the rat garden or whatever, but it's kind of intertwined. So we put this proposal together. We're going to use the 7 line as a way to look at urban nature, and it was an amazing grant proposal. They didn't accept it. We got no money. Nothing happened. So Jeanette said, I like it so much, I'm going to teach a course at Columbia, a grad course, and I'm just going to, is it okay if I use it as a class? We said, yeah, sure. So she taught it as a graduate class, and her students made the most amazing podcasts, like all tied to particular subway stops. So I'll show you some as we go along, but basically, instead of making architecture boards and whatever, they made little NPR-style radio episodes that looked at the intersection of some built environment thing and nature colliding at the different subway stops. We turned them into podcasts. We turned that into a kind of guided tour. Okay, it's very, very high end here. Basically, the podcast got put in order, the order of the stops, and you could get on at Times Square and ride it all the way out to Flushing and hear about the different environments you were going through. So this is kind of like looking out the window. Everybody has iPods on. They're kind of listening. They're looking at this really basic map that we made. And I like this picture. Nobody's looking out the window. They're drinking coffee and talking to each other, which is what everybody sort of does. But they're getting kind of mildly interested in kind of what's out the window. They can think about it later, right? It doesn't have to be so aggressive. So I thought I would just really quickly, let's see if this works. Maybe it's not going to work. Hold on. If I can find the doc, I'll play you one of these, what these episodes were like. We'll see. You're listening to Safari 7, a podcast tour of urban animal life along the number 7 train line. Grand Central, 42nd Street.
The 7 train tunnel you are now traveling through is known as the Steinway Tunnel. William Steinway, perhaps best known for his piano manufacturing company headquartered in Queens, was also the financier of the tunnel's construction. In 1890, the rubble from the tunnel construction was deposited on a small rock outcropping in the middle of the East River called Man-o'-War Reef and renamed Belmont Island. It has been variously constructed, forgotten, rediscovered, rededicated, illegally conquered, and apparently again forgotten. Parklands Commissioner John Matera.
It's not like it's not on anybody's map. I have all the city data here. It seems to totally not be there.
After some more sleuthing, John discovered that the island was owned by New York State, technically located in the borough of Manhattan, and part of the 10044 zip code. The island is a 100 by 200 foot pile of jagged rocks. There is no live vegetation on the island, only several dead trees and some low, dead shrubs, a radio tower, and 30-foot dedicatory arch. The island is home to a substantial population of birds, in particular the double-crested cormorant. In 2008, there were 24 cormorant nests, up 15% from the previous year. Dr. Susan Elbin, the Director of Conservation of the New York Audubon Society.
Cormorants are phenomenal fish eaters. And if you look at the way they're built, they have a hook on the end of the beak and they have very, very strong necks, and they dive after fish. They can also nest in dead trees. They don't need to have leafy trees to nest on.
Living in these structures.
Okay, so I'll cut it short. The punchline of the story is sort of that when they dug the Steinway Tunnel, they dumped the dirt. The dirt turned into an island. As all the other waterways on the East Coast became polluted, that little incidental island became the main place that cormorants lived. And so everybody's sort of forgotten it. It's this kind of incidental habitat that nobody sort of notices right out from the UN. It's kind of named Utant Island after the Burmese, the then Burmese president. It was dedicated at some moment by the UN. Everybody forgot about it. A couple artists have put flags up on it and like claimed it for whatever and gotten arrested. And it's just this sort of weird thing that's in the island, that's in the kind of middle of the river. Okay, so strangely, like we kind of, she did this kind of, this class, generated this, the students made this amazing content, and everybody sort of got excited, and we really had no plans to do anything, but all of a sudden we started to have all these people who wanted to get involved. We had, oh, maybe I can do something, or is there going to be an exhibition? Is there going to be something? So we started having these team meetings with no real plan. Those team meetings turned into an exhibition at Columbia's Studio X space that's down on Varick Street. And one of the ideas was we would kind of make this big topographic map of Queens, not a street map, but a map of the natural landscape that the train went through, and we would kind of turn it into a gigantic iPod. So basically it would have like little iPods underneath it. You could plug into the subway station and listen to the episodes. So the challenge was we had all these things that were spatial. You're supposed to ride the train. But what happens when you make an exhibition and you're not going to be riding a train? You have to like re-spatialize it and make it interesting in some way. What was nice was we had different people from different disciplines, a bunch of architects, a bunch of designers. This is Jen Lee. She was working with me and she wanted to get involved. She had this idea that she didn't want to make maps. She wasn't interested in any of that. She wanted to make something that was narrative. So she said, what if we make these shapes? Like in Bryant Park, there are always these birds of prey that swoop down and pick up little dogs or pick up little rats or whatever. So what if we just make these silhouettes of like a hawk and a chihuahua, and we kind of like make these decorative things, or the birds that always crash into the planes at LaGuardia. It's always some man-made situation and a natural habitat colliding. So she made us like 25 of these different narrative things. A team of guys made this sort of amazing puzzle map of Queens. And if, like, let's say you live in Astoria. What was funny, we had people come and they were like, oh, I live in Astoria. Which one is Astoria? You know, like, because basically nobody recognizes their city boundaries. They only recognize like probably the roads that surround. So big iPod, you plug into it, you listen to it. The reason the table has so many legs is we kind of envisioned that at some point these tables would kind of disperse. Like maybe we could give the people in Astoria like an Astoria table, and maybe they could kind of combine in different ways. We also made these kind of graphics that are on the wall, which are cross sections that retell the same stories. So the Falcon versus the Chihuahua at kind of Bryant Park Station, that actually is the Utant Island one. That Steinway Tunnel is a really interesting story. The city didn't build Steinway Tunnel, like the Steinway company did to ship its pianos in, but they sort of didn't finish it and they defaulted and the city bought it. So there's a lot of like, the deeper you go into the story, the more interesting it is. Something more ecological, the microclimates that happen in vacant lots. So basically different plants grow on the sunny side versus the shady side. And so you get this really specific condition in these lots where people think nothing's going on. The way insects and the city interact legislatively in the cemetery belt, the reemergence of the urban chicken in all its forms at I think at Corona Plaza, and the snakehead fish, my favorite. So these are kind of worth going into in more depth, but I won't. Somebody else wanted to make a better map. There was a lot of criticism of our first map, so we're like, oh, let's make another map. Somebody wanted to make buttons. We made buttons. This is Steve Handel. Steve Handel is a plant ecologist, and he said, well, you know, I really like your thing, but it's one big gaping hole. You're only talking about animals, and I, as a plant ecologist, am mostly interested in hearing about plants. And that's a problem. So he said, well, it's not that much of a problem. Why don't you do some episodes and we'll make an addendum to the thing. So Steve proposed this little walk, like you get off one subway station and you walk. They called it Weed Walk, because he's going around like identifying different things that grow out of the sidewalk. And there's an amazing episode about this tree, which is, he goes back and does the detective work to try and figure out why there is this amazing fruit-bearing peach tree in the middle of a parking lot. And if you walk around the block, there's all sorts of kind of fruit-bearing trees. The guy who used to own the property was Greek, and he was super into fruit trees, so he basically planted them all, and then he sold the land. And so over time, these things kind of either survived or came up, whatever. So he's very into like how this stuff, not just what this stuff is, but how this stuff came to be where it is. And he made a bunch of really crazy podcasts. We had another friend, the guy who went on to do Pinterest, liked the project, he made a website for it. This is the exhibition opening, kind of typical sort of brouhaha. Okay, so, and then we thought we were done, and then New Museum had a street festival, and we had an intern from Sweden, and she was like, well, we have to participate in this. And I said, well, we can't, we have no manpower. She said, I will do it, I know what to do. So we gave her all the parts, and she went and kind of set them up herself, and she ran the kind of a version of the booth. This guy, I really like this slide. This guy, I have no idea who it is. It's somebody who contacted one of the other partners and said, I have this community event and I really want to do a Safari 7 thing, but I only want this one neighborhood. Like I don't know if you guys know Queens, maybe somebody can tell me what neighborhood this is, I have no idea. He came, he kind of tucked it under his arm, he went on the subway with some brochures, and he kind of did his event with that neighborhood in Queens. And people could plug in and hear about the natural condition. So this sort of like participatory or like take part of it and do whatever you want thing, like we like a lot. The people from the MTA came to see the exhibition, probably to see if they should sue us for using the number 7 or something. And the woman that runs MTA Arts is really, really fantastic. We did a meeting with her and she said, there's no possible way we can ever give you any money, and there's no way we can ever facilitate you doing something. Just to be clear. And we should set up a schedule of meetings together. We're like, what is she saying, right? She just basically said no, and then she said yes, and no, and yes. But what she was saying was, the MTA can't give you any money, but you know, maybe there's something somewhere that we can kind of do. Like we kind of, in some ways, we aligned incredibly well with the program of what the MTA sort of wanted to say about themselves, that in a very positive way, mass transportation is very nature friendly, and it is a way to kind of connect to things. And it is a kind of way to travel and see different parts and gain a different perspective. So the imaginative component rang true to them in some way. So they couldn't give us any support, but they gave us space. So we did things like bus things, we did metro cards. They couldn't put us on their website, but they could link to us. So we made a little microsite. They couldn't pay for a brochure, but they could kind of connect us with a printer who had some extra paper or something, you know. So basically, in a very roundabout way, they were able to kind of facilitate us doing an Earth Day event for them. And so we kind of went to Vanderbilt Hall. We restaged it. Of course, we had an entire exhibition ready because we had already done it. So we basically brought that in and kind of put it in there. But one interesting note is that we realized the first time we did it sort of for grad students and people who are interested in design and architecture. Here we were just doing it in Grand Central. Nobody knew anything. Like you were getting out-of-town groups who were travelers coming through or tired commuters. So we had to develop a way of telling people about it and really describing it more so. So like, download stuff, here's the address, listen to it, look out the window, just like ABC. These are just people in Vanderbilt Hall. So Steve Handel's back. Every time we do an event, Steve Handel comes back, and he's constantly like, I love this picture. He's like, he's got everybody's attention. He's literally picked something out of the gutter on his, right before he came in the thing, and it tells some fascinating story that's probably true about kind of what that plant is, and is amazing. So I put this slide in, not because it just looks horrible, but because every time you show this, you think, oh, it's just magically appeared. But basically, there's a whole group of volunteers that come in and have to schlep around and plug stuff in and screw a million things in. And so after we did the MTA thing, we thought, aha, we're the tip of the iceberg. We're gonna connect with every city on the Earth, and we're gonna do one for their transit system. You know, so like if this was Safari 7, this is going to be in wherever, where they have a ring road, and this is going to be some other kind of thing. So we made these kind of like, we made things to announce that we were going to do it. And luckily, Columbia was at this phase under the Dean Mark Wigley, where they were expanding their this network of informal event spaces called Studio X. So we tried to kind of tag along with that, and Jeanette worked really hard to get grants and basically staged a Beijing Safari 4. 4 is the only transit line in Beijing that's privatized. There's a lot of trickiness that went into it. Basically, China does not allow foreigners to come in and speak to people on the street about what they think about the environment. It's kind of straight up illegal. And so we were initially partnering with a university in Beijing, and they backed out because they couldn't be involved. So Jeanette kind of figured a way to basically get a group. I believe she got a group of students who were from Beijing that were studying in the US to get visas to go back to Beijing and kind of investigate urban nature and generate the content. So it became another website and another booklet and a kind of a mini exhibition. And here's kind of like, we're sort of trying to figure out how to save time and save work when we do these things as we go along. And in some ways, I think the transit department was interested, but slightly perplexed. So they gave us space to hand out booklets, brochures, and then kind of like space on their video system to kind of play these kind of short videos about the research. And the end is that tomorrow, I believe, Safari 1 launches in Sao Paulo as part of the Sao Paulo Architecture Biennale, and then Safari something, I can't remember the name to be honest, launches in Hong Kong and then in Shenzhen for the 2 Chinese Architecture Biennales. So Jeanette has been flying around manically trying to help people do research and kind of culling it together, and we've been culling it together into a series of websites that are going to launch. So yeah, a grant proposal turned into something sort of much infinitely stranger and more interesting. Okay. Now the next 2 projects sort of run together. Also, how are we doing on time? I'm a blabber, so we're good. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So this is a series of projects that just kind of started and then kind of just went. The first was we got invited by Damon Rich, who's come and talk to be part of this part of these teams that proposed gateways, a gateway for kind of Newark. So I don't know if has anybody been to Newark? Anybody been to anywhere in Newark besides the airport? Oh, more people, okay. So this is like one of the signs to Newark, you know, it's like, what's going on? This one's kind of particularly kind of okay, because at least it says Newark, downtown, and ironbound. A lot of the time you get like Newark, airport, or like Pennsylvania, or whatever. They somehow forget there's even a city there. So the proposal was to take key roads and make some sort of gateway moment. So Damon invited us. We partnered with Kate Orff to do a proposal. The first thing we thought is like, well, we're going to make gateways, but I don't know, we're going to announce this really great thing, and then people are going to go into the city, and it's not going to be like that. So, like, we don't want to do an edge thing, like a gateway thing. We want to do something that actually makes the middle part somewhat better. And that Newark has a nickname. It's the Brick City, and the reason it's Brick City is because it came into its own at this point of industrialization, but also through kind of manual labor and kind of piecing things together one thing at a time. So we thought maybe if you take those two things, the attempt to sort of be earnest and kind of deal with the center, not the outside, and the idea that this is a kind of community that historically kind of does things incrementally. We could do something like introduce trees and turn and kind of do something better for the interior of the project. So we started with the most pedestrian move, you know, the French allée, like putting trees on different streets. And we thought, if you could do it in an interesting way, you could kind of create lines like borders, and you could create districts. In the most pedestrian way, you could kind of like somehow start greening the city and create sort of different districts that looked better, you know, kind of were better for people. And then at kind of key moments, you could use the old cisterns that are on top of some of these industrial buildings as kind of planters, and kind of, that's where this N trees, right? It's super bad pun, like entries, right? Like that Newark would go from being a factory moment to like something sort of reborn. That's just the tree and the cistern. So then we talked a lot about how do we talk about this, right? That's like a fine plan, but nobody feels like they're able to do it. So instead of making some fancy schmancy renderings of some amazing future, can we just make like renderings of the most basic future, like a street with some trees on it, that maybe somebody's given money to like plant this tree, or maybe there's like a website that celebrates which community organizations do things, or a way to kind of find it. And that there could be some sort of help in helping people get there through trying to sort out together which things government could sort of take on as initiatives, which things might be sponsored by community. So how community can use this initiative to do what it wants to do already, and then kind of what kind of individual businesses could be incentivized to do. So I mean, the things are intentionally supposed to be cheesy, but they're supposed to get you to say, well, actually it's not undoable, it's just we need as designers to figure out to start engaging the financial mechanisms and the city mechanisms, not just to like paint you a picture and then dump it back on government to do. That if we're going to give you a proposal, we need to kind of engage on that layers. So the city didn't do anything. So they had an exhibition, and Cory Booker came and he shook everybody's hands and said this was great. And it sort of got tabled because they had other things that they were starting up. One of them was a new Riverfront park. So since we were already in conversation with Damon said, why don't you help us start visualizing what the kind of a new Riverfront park is and what a potential greenway is, so that we can take these images and sort of leverage them to get partners and kind of so does everybody know where Newark is? Okay. It's like this, I don't know what that is, like chicken with its arm out shape, pork chop shape or something. This is Manhattan. It's just great because of the weird Google thing. This is the Passaic, comes up here. That's downtown Newark. That's the park. So basically, if you zoom into that red dot, you get this park. That's where the Passaic goes around this kind of like interior curve. And like every other urban waterway, like the Passaic was basically fenced off with either industrial businesses on the water, and for the most part still is, where you couldn't get to the water. So Damon did a pretty amazing thing. He started building community interest in the kind of water by kind of bringing tours down to the water and taking photos of those tours and then showing those photos and then getting another group and getting a student group to go down there and meeting with the business people that ran businesses, so that the businesses weren't worried that somebody was going to come down and try and get them out, but that they were kind of interested, that the government was interested in collaborating with the kind of businesses that were already there. They started running boat tours of the Passaic. We went on one. It was pretty interesting. having community workshops, all this stuff. Parades to the water. Newark wants to walk to the water. So we got involved literally by going over Damon's house and trying to draw how we would draw Newark if one were to draw it in a very favorable light. So I don't know if anybody has done cartography or populist cartography. Anybody? Map makers? None? Okay. Really, really interesting. The first problem is, how do you look at the thing, right? Like, from what angle are you looking? Because if you look from one angle, it looks landlocked. If you look at it from another angle, it looks like it's a city on the river, right? Like, so the big thing is, downtown Newark is sort of here, and this is the Passaic. So we tried to figure out how, in a rectangle, it would be a map. We could have this view where you saw the kind of river and you saw kind of Newark extending in from it. And then the challenge is sort of to take a street grid and open it up so that we could draw a representation of all the buildings that, if you were from Newark, you would recognize as part of your city. So there's a whole genre of people who make tourist maps. We've never made one before. So we were in this conversation and we were saying, like, yeah, we want to make a representation of Newark. And Damon was saying, yeah, I think it should be like a tourist map. And we were saying, well, how is the tourist industry going in Newark at the moment? And it's like, there is no tourist industry in Newark at the moment, but we'd like to say that there should be, right? Like, it might be in economic downturn, but actually there's super amazing stuff in Newark if you walk around. Like, the FBI building is there. There's all sorts of, like, really strange Portuguese neighborhoods that have really peculiar buildings that have accumulated over time. The downtown is really rich. There's a kind of Mies housing complex. There's two noteworthy parks. So we developed a way to kind of draw all these buildings, which is a very weird, we're not illustrators, so we had to come up with a systematic way to be able to draw all these buildings as they would be recognized by people in Newark, right? So, like, this building, there's probably only one recognizable face, right? The other side has, like, some air conditioning ducts on it or whatever, like, you wouldn't want to talk about it. But in this view, right, so you have to, like, turn the building this way, so almost like you're making something out of slips of paper, you know, like a two-dimensional theater set, so that you can kind of understand what everything is, and then adjust the street grid and kind of move stuff around. So it's a very funny representation of Newark in that it's not a geographically accurate version. It's a narrative depiction of a city. And so this, what's funny is this is sort of the initial drawing. This is a version that has kind of all the locations keyed in, and this is a version where, like, those things are sort of made more legible. So, and there's some pretty bad stuff in Newark too. So that we tried to kind of include that all as well, like the Diamond Shamrock Superfund site. This is where they made Agent Orange for the Vietnam conflict. It was a pesticide company, and basically they just kind of dumped all the dioxin in the water, so it's one of the reasons the Passaic is a Superfund site. So instead of being like, let's not talk about it, it's like that site is also kind of talking, and it's saying, we dumped so many toxins into the river, the government made it illegal to fish and ordered us to clean it up. So right next to people who are saying, you know, like, we dig doing capoeira in the kind of park, like, you also have these other institutions that are saying different things. And it's not trying to resolve it, it's trying to make you kind of interested in the industrial and kind of basically the history of what all this stuff is and what's interesting about Newark. So, okay, so that exists, and allegedly we're going to publish it at any moment. This project's been going on for about 3 years. We kind of did it before there was a concrete park plan, and then we revised it, and then we revised it again, and now they're at this moment where they're proposing a greenway plan. So they're kind of holding off releasing it, hoping that it will bring in kind of positive feelings to bolster a kind of greenway thing. Okay, one more piece of the puzzle. How are we doing on time? Okay. How are you guys doing? Yeah? Okay. So now we know everything there is to know about the riverfront in Newark, or at least a lot about it. And so Damon says, why don't you get involved in the signage portion of the project? I said, yeah, okay, it sounds good. So the thing that I think is interesting about parks, did you guys ever go to a park and like go to a park with your mom or whatever, and she's like, oh, let's take a picture of us in the park. And you're like, all right, where should I stand? By like this tree? You know, basically it's sort of like, unless it's Central Park and you're in the main meadow or you're in like some really recognizable spot, it's sort of like, it's questionable what defines a location in some ways, right? If the park doesn't have distinctive features. So when we started this, we did not know if the park was going to have distinctive features or not. So we thought the distinctive thing is going to have to be the signage. So if you go with your mom and you need a picture that says you were in Riverfront Park in Newark, stand by the sign, and at least there's something, right? It says Newark Riverfront Park. So it's got to be a pretty nice sign. How it wound up was that there actually are a lot of distinctive features, but that's not how we started the project. So the landscape architect's Lee Weintraub, if you've been to IKEA, yeah, okay. If you've been to IKEA, Lee did the kind of industrial kind of leftover park that's there. Also a park in Long Island City that has the, I think it's the part that has the big cranes kind of left in it. He's really into like post-industrial, you know, like the coolness of post-industrial whatever. So as you enter Newark, you basically come this way. If you drive from New York, you come down this, and you go into downtown, which is here. And to understand the park, basically that's the edge. There's another park kind of here. And this is the new park. There's a kind of fence that bounds it, keeps it in from the road. There's a big railing that keeps you from falling into the Passaic if you're going a little bit too fast or walking carelessly. And there are kind of various points of interest that the client group kind of defined before we started. So we started, as we always start, by trying to throw a bunch of ideas out there. And one of the interesting things right away was we kept making sketches, and the client team, the landscape architect, Damon, and the people from the rest of the people from the city kept saying something really interesting. They kept saying, yeah. No. We don't want a New York sign system. We want a Newark sign system. And I was like, yeah, no, don't worry, we'll put the word Newark on there. It's like, it'll be fine. But what he was trying to get at was like that the things we were initially proposing, they felt like they were modernist things, or they felt like that they were in the critical spirit of like what's happening in New York architecture or design or whatever, right? And that felt not only inappropriate, but it felt actually hostile to them. That they somehow wanted to pull out some sort of voice from the city, or some sort of voice that they couldn't quite define, that was as far from a New York voice as possible. And I said, well, but New York's pretty nice. Like, don't you think you could like fix it up a little bit with some New York type stuff, right? That's a little bit of a joke. They were really against it. So we did all sorts of proposals. They said, well, we have no money. And we said, well, can you just use the sign shop for the city, and we'll figure some interesting way to make park signs. No. Can we just take all the post-industrial stuff you guys find when you dig up stuff and integrate it into the signage in some way. No, it feels too dirty. So basically nothing, right? It's like nothing. So for months it was nothing. And eventually we said, well, we're not going to make anything then. You know, we're not going to make any new structure in the park. We're just going to use the existing structure you already have. So we know you have a railing that keeps it separated from the road, and you have a railing that keeps it separated from the water. So we're just going to cut graphics into the pavement or into these railings, and that's what you get. So we're only doing the graphic components. We're not doing any structural components. So on the railway or on the kind of wooden fence, we basically just devised a set of different gestures. This kind of entry gesture, which is sort of like this creative playthings, chunky, nature meets industrial infrastructure tribute. And we thought, like, in some ways a park or any place is inhabited by a series of characters and a series of ghosts, like the things that were there in the past that shaped the place and the things that are there currently that shape the place. So the bridges that define it, or the factories that were there that then burnt down and were kind of turned into parklands. This sort of very basic pseudo-rustic placemaking, kind of trailhead type language, where things are sort of just cut into the wood and kind of painted. We came up with a bunch of stuff. It was really interesting. It emerged through conversation. It's an ongoing conversation we always have with clients and collaborators, where you kind of make something and they say, well, that looks pretty good, but is there going to be that much white space? Like, is it cheaper to print if you don't use so much ink? Like, why do you guys do that? So we stopped doing it like a couple of years ago, and now we fill every single thing up with everything. Like, we do it way before any client or any collaborator gets near anything. So in this one, we're like, well, let's just put some of these kind of great houses and marks inside of this fence, you know, inside of this. So this is basically the schematic of the sign. But then if you're standing there waiting for the bus or whatever, there's a lot of stuff to look at, and there's a lot of buildings you might recognize and things in there. We drew kind of the community around there is Portuguese, Brazilian Portuguese. So we kind of drew icons that we thought would kind of fit. We did a little bit of community testing. You know, certainly like, you had to have soccer, not American football. You had to have certain kinds of dogs versus other kinds of dogs. The water had to be green because it's a Passaic. That's a joke. And on these kind of railings, we kind of developed a way of etching into them that was really, really thick, so that they couldn't be damaged in some ways. And we developed this other type of sign where basically, in some ways, like, is the funniest solution that, like, Newark got a very information-heavy rustic treatment that made the park read more as a national park or more as something outside of the city than something inside. An interesting note: we were at this point with like cutting logs, and then somebody was like, "Are we going to use those straight logs? You know, like, is it just going to be all straight like that and not really that interesting? It's going to be boring like that?" We're like, "Okay, where are you going?" And we're like, "Well, can we just keep some of the root or the branches on?" And we're like, "Yeah, actually, this is so much better. It's just like totally weird and asymmetrical." So, and then the information that gets relayed through some of the signs basically talks about either the natural system, sort of the natural systems intersecting with the post-industrial systems. So the kind of bridges that were there for kind of train traffic that got repurposed and kind of basically how do they work, the canals that kind of basically defined the site. So there's all these kind of vestigial traces of the Morris Canal, which has a sort of amazing story behind it. The story of the CSO, the combined sewerage overflow outfall, which happens right in the middle of the park. So, we had this great discussion when we were like, we're not architects, so we were kind of looking at the plans, and we were like, I think the sewers comes through there. And they were like, yeah, no, we're super into that. Like, it's a teaching moment. We were like, that's how the city works. Like, everybody goes to the bathroom, and it comes out into the river, and that's just basically how everything works. So we don't want to hide it. We want to sort of just say how it works, and that's how it is. So we're like, excellent. So we were able to kind of tell these stories that were like, basically talk about how, they're like, they don't try to be the subject matter is kind of silly, but they just try and kind of show you how the city works in kind of like a clear narrative way. That like there was a point of time when, or they try and tell you what the condition that led to the kind of contamination was, in some sort of way where if you're a school kid or if you're just kind of like an interested person, it could be interesting to just sit there and kind of read. There's also, we kind of developed this way of drawing that let us move really fast. So Damon was the go-between between the community, and there were like 12 community organizations that would be like, actually, the horse wasn't that kind of a horse, it was this kind of a horse, and it was that kind of smoke that came out. People had very, very specific interests. So we knew that at the beginning, and we kind of developed a system where we could kind of move fast to keep revising and revising. This is the opening of the park. It was kind of awesome. There was a parade and a kind of celebration. These are the kind of signature moments. So there are these very strange day glow pylons that you can see from the train, and a sort of bright orange boardwalk, bright orange plastic boardwalk that you can see if you take the Amtrak and go by. You can kind of like clear, it's just like shining. You can totally see it. And so our signs kind of, some of our signs sit where these people are looking. So in this instance, allegedly, like you're standing here looking across at that thing, and you're like, and this is sort of telling you what it is. So it's like situating you in this kind of industrial site that if you didn't have a sign, it might not be legible or it might not be as interesting. There's a CSO panel. Jackson Street Bridge, it's like, Newark has this amazing system of bridges that almost each one turns in a different way. So like some of them go up, some of them like turn this way, some of them like pivot that way to kind of like let trains or traffic, let the boats through. Harrison, New Jersey is across the river, which President William Howard Taft called the hive of industry in 1912 as part of his presidential campaign. So there's some pretty corny stuff and also some really interesting stuff in there. There's kind of the beginning of the CSO. Strangely, some of the production is still kind of underway. So like these are the kind of gateway signs. We're feverishly trying to like get this project wrapped up. But what I like about this is like it has to be baseball bat proof. You have to be able to like sort of ram it with your car and it will still be okay. So we developed these ways of kind of drawing things that are sort of like super sturdy, and also everything has to be child-proof, which is the first time we've ever child-proof things. Mm-hmm. They're all, I don't know if you guys know about this, there's all these tools that you're supposed to have, like to measure whether a kid's wrists can get caught in stuff. And at the end of employing all of these things, like making it sturdy, making it child-proof, you actually wind up with a certain kind of form language, which I think is actually really interesting. That's some more factories, and that's it. That's where we got to.
Take a seat. Thanks so much, Glenn. That was fascinating. And but before we get sort of dug into the questions, I need to understand a little bit of your personal trajectory here. Because, okay, we've got guitarist, and then we've got moving into graphic design, working on, projects like Prada at 2x4, and then Newark River waterfront. And it seems very a strange journey. But was it, for you, was that actually more of a natural progression? Did you always have that kind of activist spirit in you?
Oh. Yeah, that's a great setup for a question. I actually think there's a lot in common. I didn't see it at the time. You know, it's like my family's, my dad and older brother are engineers. So I first studied engineering at Cooper Union, and because I really liked math. But then it sort of seemed like a little bit, it's sort of about being a teenager at that point, that the world seemed very like it needed somebody to complain about it or something, or like it needed more people against it. So that was part of the romance of music. I mean, it was also music, but also the kind of protest in some way. I found myself at the end of that in Nashville, and just sort of bored of doing it, and started doing design. And then when I started doing design, it sort of became a little bit different. It was sort of about trying to understand the context that I was designing in, to try and up my, like, to try and get it to a higher level of practice. And every time I tried to kind of like, or each time I tried to get it a higher level of practice, I realized that it was sort of about understanding the context in which I was making work, and that you got to a certain point where you really had to kind of determine what you were doing based on the context, not that you were making a super expensive wallpaper for a super expensive company, that that you had to choose who you were sort of talking to, and you also had to choose what you were developing as your own methodology. So I learned a lot being at 2x4, and then when I started my own practice, I thought, yeah, we just have to let go of a lot of things, and we sort of have to focus on how things are done, like exploring how things can be done, not how can we do something that has a particular shine on it, or how can we do something that's well thought of. To like go and actually explore the kind of core questions about how things are made together with other people, because that's what I think that's what I found context to be. It's like your context isn't you alone and then other people looking at you. Like in the 2000s and 2010s, it's sort of making things as part of a group and imagining what sort of group you're in making those things. Is that a little convoluted?
That's a really great answer. Which leads us to the topic of collaboration, which is obviously very pivotal for you. And we've seen some very positive outcomes from your collaborative work. Have there been examples, it could be seen that the sort of graphic designer who, the cliche is they're very controlling and want to have everything exact. Could be seen that in combination with collaboration would be a collision.
Traumatic.
Exactly, traumatic. Yes, exactly, a psychological trauma. So have there been instances where it's been less productive than what we've seen here, or that in fact the collaboration dilutes things rather than being additive?
Well, I'd first say that it's been a tremendous learning curve. Like in some ways, I thought I had learned a lot about design until I started trying to be more flat-footed about collaboration. And then I realized I actually knew that I was super insecure, that I was really trying to control things that there was no way I was going to control. And that all my sort of bad feelings about things came from the fact that I was trying to control relationships. It's like a little psychotherapy. It's like I was trying to control relationships instead of just having relationships with kind of clients and collaborators. So there's a lot of instances where we had we would basically I would develop ways of working that would sort of stack the deck, right? So there's no secret, right? So basically you say, oh yeah, we'll make some sketches, blah, blah, blah. And then you make a ton of sketches. You make the most amazing stuff ever, right? And that's like a nice thing to do, but it's also a way to kind of say, actually, we have more vitality and we're more psyched than kind of anything. In some ways, to kind of put yourself in a stronger position to help steer things and also to kind of offer more stuff. But sometimes that's actually like creates a weirder, in some ways, there's no kind of right way to kind of be. And you have to kind of, it has to shift all the time. It has to change with different people. And sometimes if you're lucky, you have clients or clients or collaborators who may not be designers, but they're actually much better designers than you are. And so you go to show them stuff and they basically have this incredible clarity on what things should be. And you're just like, we should definitely do that. Like that idea is really, really great. And like that sounds exactly like the right thing we should do. You sort of have to let go of those things. So the better your group of collaborators and clients are, the more it kind of pushes you to actually be honest about what sort of relationship you're crafting.
Well, sure, and you've got great collaborators, but I'm just wondering if there have been instances when, you just find that, the people you're working with are bringing you down.
Yeah, we definitely had some. I would say out of 5 years of doing it, and probably, I've never counted how many different projects or collaborators we have, but we keep a pretty brisk pace. Mm-hmm. I'd say there were maybe 2 or 3 sets of collaborators that were not good collaborators. They just were not good. And the reason was that they spoke in someone else's voice. Like there was another person who wasn't present that was anxious about something. Right. And they were always like, well, I don't think Louise is going to like that. Louise likes the type green. And we're like, well,
tell Louise to get her ass in here.
Let's talk about it. Well, okay, we'll take it to her. Like that there was no possibility of discussion. And somehow, like, I think I'm always good if we talk about it. I see a reason to. I mean, some things should be incredibly boring. They should be uncreative. They should just serve this function in the world of straight information. And it's totally fine. We make plenty of stuff that's really flat. Mm-hmm. I think you should. Like not everything in the world should be exciting. If you only eat exciting meals, like, are you really having a experience with food? Or you're just like, it's just like everything's like, wow, entire life's crazy. I think a lot of things just have to be regular and like be boring. And like when clients come and they're like, I want something boring, like yeah, okay, great. Let's make it boring. We'll make it nice, but it can be boring. And that's great. I like that. And then other people are like, I want, or will be like, I think your thing is sort of, I think you're at this moment where you really need to like do something interesting to re-engage. And they're like, all right, so like, let's be adventurous or whatever. Like, I don't think a designer always has to be, I don't think the value of a designer is this perpetual bombastic creation. And I think you can have many different relationships that are super productive to help people or to push your agenda on them. It's not always altruistic, but it doesn't always have to be
the next best thing since sliced bread.
It doesn't have to be wow, like wow. Sometimes it has to be wow, but not all the time. And I think like the people that we've not collaborated well with, there's another good scenario, which was we had a collaborator and we said, okay, let's get together and talk about, what you're imagining and what we're imagining and stuff. And they're like, no, not really. Why don't you just make what you're going to make and then we'll say yes or no. And we're like, no, we're basically not going to do that because we build up no shared conversation about the thing. So then like, what relationship do you have when that thing shows up? It's like, I think a big like diagrammatic way to understand what I think design is like, it's like design isn't like if you're a client or a collaborator and I'm a designer, this is not the relationship we have. Here's the design, it's in between us. The relationship we have is this. We're on this side, working together to make that. You're not confrontational. And I think because each party has to be invested in some way, but if you're saying, well, show me some of that magic, show me the magic you can do, and then we'll see if that's the right magic for us. I say, we don't really do magic. Like, there's no, like, if you're expecting it to be so magical, it's pretty much not, you know. The magic comes from having a conversation and talking about stuff and like making the most amazing version or sussing out the possibilities of stuff and being really rigorous about it. And it takes more than, you know, it takes a conversation to do it.
I'm going to ask you one more question before we open up to the students and the audience. Now, you often are dealing with masses and masses of information and trying to distill it in interesting ways. Not so much, I mean, on some of the projects we've seen here, but also in your other work to do with housing and other social issues. And I noticed that you often come down on you talked about this kind of child-friendly aesthetic when we were talking about the wooden structures, but you often do that graphically as well. So cartoons, simplified forms, and so on, digestible chunks of information. Yep. Great solution. But I wonder if you've ever had any pushback on that from communities you've been working with, in the sense that maybe it oversimplifies or dumbs down or whatever. You know?
Yeah, I think there are really radically different situations. Like a really great dichotomy would be like the projects we've done together with the Buell Center, and then the projects we've done together for like Newark. You know, it's like they couldn't be more. The Buell Center is the PhD program in architecture at Columbia, and we did another kind of series of projects that started as kind of helping them with some booklets about housing, and then turned into this sort of manifesto called the Buell Hypothesis, that was the sort of the research document for an exhibition at MoMA. And then the exhibition was called Foreclosed. And then we did the exhibition catalog, and then we did a fourth publication, which was all the collected media around the thing, organized and codified so that the media could kind of be analyzed, like the conversation around the thing could be analyzed. In some ways, the language was super dry, like because the organization of the content was the collection and thoughtful organization of the content was the main thing. And also, in a funny way, it was meant to be a symbolic object in a very different way than like the things in Newark are meant to be a symbolic object. Like in Newark, there's this kind of thought that just basically make it accessible. You know, like try and boil it down to something that it's not necessarily dumb or not necessarily like leave stuff out. Like maybe you have more simple pieces that when you look at them as a set, you can see that there's actually like, oh, wait, there's a kind of very simple narrative of this dioxin disaster. Oh, okay, here's a kind of very simple narrative of the government trying to kind of put in this canal to kind of further the economics of the place. Oh, here's a kind of personal narrative of a person who lived there. That like in between those things, you can start to see the complexity of a place and of a scenario, but that if the objects themselves and the narrative themselves are complex, then it's like they never allow you to see, kind of get into the kind of dialogue. And I think we try to think of, we do a lot of projects that have multiple components, and we try and think about them in that way. Like, it's like if there's a book and a website and an identity, like what is the space that's carved out by, like the identity doesn't have to do everything. Actually, if the identity does everything, then you don't need a website, because it's just like repeating itself. So how do you distribute the way things talk across the different media to make like a conversation? Like places have conversations, and publication series have conversations amongst themselves. But if there's too high of a threshold to get in, then that object, that media object, becomes singular. It's like, you know, it's sort of like the 1990s like poster thing, like where you're like, oh, you got to collage it, and like let's make some custom type, and it's got 6 layers deep, and it's got a Foucault quote on it, and it's like it's an entire universe, and it's a PhD in a poster. It's amazing. But don't put it on my wall next to any other posters. Actually, I just like a picture of it in a book. I like to appreciate it, but it's way too complicated to insert into my life with a mortgage and a business and a house and 15 other conversations that are not about Foucault nor about complexity. I think things can be complex and enter the mix, but I think there's a confusion about the responsibility of each object to have this infinite depth. I think depth comes from conversation, not from embodiment through representation. And even those books for the Buell Center, which are they're pretty dense, they try not to be dense, they try to be rigorous. You know, they try to be like, okay, here's what's gonna happen, and then we just really worked it out. So you basically like, it's sort of that diagram of Newark, like we're gonna promise you on the outside that it's gonna work this way, and then when you get into the inside, we actually think that it really should work that way. You know, so if like this is gonna be a book of media that basically allows you to look through and start to see the discussions that happened in media about a particular exhibition, then really expect you to be able like to turn to one page and kind of see something and then sort of flip a couple pages and begin to understand how that relates to the thing, you know, on the first page. You know, it's not, I don't think it's hand holding. I think it's sort of like stepping up, and like you sort of made a pitch and then you basically got to do it.
Guiding a conversation.
Yeah.
Very cool. All right, let's take 2 questions from the first years and then maybe 1 or 2 from the others and kind of good. Let's take that first.
Hi, I'm Meg. I'm a first-year student. I have one short question and then a longer one. The short one is, what was the lifespan of the Safari 7 project from when you thought about or did write the grant, and obviously it continues presently, you know, with PhD and everything. So that's my first question. The second one is, you talked about how, you know, earlier in life you sort of felt the world needed, you know, a protest. In a lot of ways, like I felt like the Safari 7 project and even the Park project was a type of protest because they're very genuine and they're not trying to like hide anything, you know, about the city. They're really trying to situate people like in truth, I guess. So, you know, it's not about like unifying the city, it's about more revealing it for, you know, all its bells and whistles. So if you could talk a little bit to that.
So first question is sort of about lifespan.
You're just saying how long could it
Yeah,
take
like from the grant until now present
Well,
day.
from the grant, like the grant took like 2 really long nights to write, and then it was like 2 weeks and then we didn't get it. So that was the first span, and then there was a semester where Jeanette started up the class, and then that was probably like us 4 months or something. Like that content was fun, and then there was a series of events at the end, and then we were then we didn't know if we were going to do anything. Then it started another cycle. That was probably to plan and do that exhibition. It actually was really fast. It was maybe 3 months from the start to the finish, because we had more than 25 or 30 people who all of a sudden want to get involved.
So what year was the class introduced? Or what?
That's a good question.
Or when the grant was written?
It's probably 4 years ago, I
Okay.
guess.
Yeah.
And what about the protest bit?
The protest bit is really interesting. I'm not sure. Well, I think I've done what I've said I don't do, which is like oversimplify stuff. I grew up in Long Island, and when I was a kid, I found everything in Long Island interesting. So my version of protest was like trying to find something that was interesting. It was also like a little bit of a stick in the eye, which I enjoyed a lot when I was younger. Safari 7 being a protest, like, I think in some ways, no, I think it's,
that's the right word.
no, but I think it's an excellent question. I think if it's a critique, which I think it is, I think it's a critique of the fact that there's not critical media platforms. In some ways, I think of that whole project as building a structure that other people can plug in. You know, basically, we always kind of thought that, well, we'll prototype this thing, we'll plug in a bunch of episodes, and then we'll get another school involved, and we'll get another thing, and then the 7 line will have like 5,000 podcasts attached to these different places, and if you go to Kew Gardens, you're like, oh, this is amazing, like all these different people have talked about these kind of animal experiences. But I think it is a criticism that there are these amazing things, and then the media channels that people build, and the experiences that there are a million amazing things to talk about and a million interesting ways to talk about them, and somehow we involve ourselves in all sorts of other stuff, not our immediate environment. And I think it's a little bit of a criticism of the media sphere in some ways. Great.
Hi, I'm Mary. I'm first year. Obviously, there are these huge educational opportunities with Safari 7. Are there any plans to develop this for students for different demographics? Taking 7th graders onto the 7th train and teaching them about this?
I like that 7th grade.
They have to look up.
When we first, right at the time when we were doing the exhibition, the first exhibition, we tried to get an education consultant on board, somebody who, as their day job, wrote curriculum for schools. Like wrote curriculum for grade schools and wrote curriculum for like junior high and high school schools. And we did the initial work to start to understand what it was, which is absolutely fascinating. Basically, you can't just make an event that's awesome and expect schools to get involved. You have to kind of understand the curriculum they're already teaching, and then kind of and then offer them a really clear way how your event slots into their curriculum in terms of how it happens over the semester. So like in week 4, every 7th grader is learning about mitosis or whatever. You know, so it's like you have to clearly slot into those things. And we started to understand the system and what was involved, and actually we're really psyched about it. But we realized that at that point we had this arc that was probably like a 3 or 4 month arc, that we were going to do an exhibition, and then that was pretty much going to be it. And as we were ramping up, we realized there was no way we were going to write curriculum, get a kind of school or two on board to kind of do it. So we involved like a graduate program, a couple of programs, but we couldn't logistically figure out how to do it in time. And sort of because the project happened in starts and stops, we always imagined that we'd somehow get involved with somebody who would take that on. In some ways, the Safari 7 project is open. It's like, take it, do it.
Yeah, so
like,
maybe it just hasn't happened yet. Right?
I think it just hasn't happened yet. The funny thing is the ones in China like basically just happened because somebody saw the project and they called and said, we're gonna do one of those. Like, is that okay? And we're like, yeah, that's great. And then Jeanette had free time, so we kind of figured out how to fly her over to Shenzhen to like work with the team. So that kind of is sort of our dream. It's not that it's like is it, send in your forms and your application and we'll do it, whatever. That it's sort of this open, it's this most obvious open platform thing that you have these trains that go along and that we're all involved in the natural environment, and then you don't need permission to do it, but we can kind of help you do it, and then you can kind of just do it yourself.
Another question. Anyone else?
Hi, I'm Justin. I'm Brazil. Could you define what critical graphic design practice means to you? Is it in the selection of project you work on? Is it in the process, or is it in the final product you deliver?
Yeah, it's great. I think, strangely, what's so funny is these projects seem very facing the audience in some ways. They seem like they're offering educational scenarios outward. But I think my interest is primarily in what I think critical design practice is, which I'll define in a second. And so I think all these projects are the result of trying to find ways, not just one way to practice, right? Because I think that's important. I think a designer does not need to find a way to practice. That's like finding your favorite thing to eat. It's like, I love chicken. Now I'm going to have chicken, every day. Our friends in the back. I don't know what the metaphor is, but actually that is what I actually try to do. I do try to eat the same thing. I like all. I think critical design practice is to me is to try and see what the restrictions are in practice. So practice is a criticism of practice and an attempt to change how you might make work. So it has very little to do with what the end result is. I'm tired of making these things with triangles. I'm going to make a swirly one, or whatever. I find that the end result. If you think about the end result as predetermining the process, then basically you just can't wait till I get through the process. I get the swirling coaster at the end. It basically didn't do anything except go as fast as you can to the end result. So I find the end result unworth talking about in some ways, and that critical practice looks at the social, the procedural restrictions. Basically, the things you're not aware you're doing, right? The traps you fall into, the ways that commerce has dictated the languages we speak in. So you basically automatically go to speak in this way. So you're like, wait, I'm not speaking in my own voice, and I'm not proceeding in my own process either. I'm not going about it. Or when I form a relationship with somebody, it's like the things that I say to them are that's kind of predetermined in a way, but I think the relationship I have to build to make something is something to be questioned too. But I think critical practice is questioning the pre-assumptions that happen around practice and find multiple ways to try and move past them or move around them or test them out, try them on in some ways. And hopefully, I think this talk was interesting for me because it's always funny to make a talk that's about one thing. Because our studio always is doing 25 to 30 projects. So it's and some continuums are beginning to form. It's that's the urban nature thing that's starting to happen here. But it's not like you build that. It's sort of you have conversations and these things start to. But I think this continuums are kind of part of critical practice too. It's more being aware and fostering a long view of developing your ideas about work through making work. Not just through I'm going to sit here at the typewriter. Computer. Show the age there for a second. How old are you? I'm get stuck in. Like, that's a very personal version, but I think that can happen as a studio or as a community too. Did I get at it? Or did I sidestep it?
Do you want him to name any names of, other practices that think of similar things? So, being good at the bar. All right, Max.
I have a question about forms you were just talking about. I mean, because we were talking about the process and that sense of relationships. The design also results in objects at the end.
Go a little louder. We're just like,
So objects, you were talking about process, kind of emphasizing relationships, but at the end of a kind of design process has an object at the end.
yeah.
And those objects have certain qualities and can determine experiences when people were involved in that process. So, what's your stance on that? In a way, form is kind of, it does involve groups, it is kind of cultural, and you probably share qualities with the forms, you create shared qualities with other people too. So, could you speak to that, like, in a larger sense, that approach to design that emphasizes, say, relationships or navigating politics or people, institutions.
It's a good day. The point is good. I'm trying to turn it into a kind of question, answerable question in my mind. But
well, if you emphasize process, then and form isn't as important, or the end result isn't what you're talking about. How do you account for the objects you need to answer that question?
Well, I'd say like the resulting objects are worth talking about as things that are made, and that kind of also steer things that will be made. In other words, like no matter how involved you are in the process of making stuff, right? At the end, you have stuff, and that stuff starts accumulating on your desk. And like it or not, that stuff starts influencing what you're gonna do. It becomes kind of objects that contain ideas, because you're like intimately connected with how you kind of made them. I think I was saying that it's not beneficial to in some ways you always have to the question's good because design is not the process of making something. Like, I'm going to go in my room, I'm going to spend like 2 weeks, and at the end, I've made this thing. It never happens that way because you have to get somebody to agree to pay for it. You have to get somebody to agree to kind of partner to make it. You have to coordinate multiple people. So there's always a looking ahead and predicting what the thing will be, right? But that thing has to either be malleable, or the way that you get there has to kind of be malleable in order to kind of allow you to have to be engaged in the thing you do. In other words, like otherwise you're a specifier, which also would be interesting. So like the books would sort of be like this. I think it's called a creative director actually. That's adventurous. It's going to be bright colors. It's going to have big type. It's going to be chunky. You basically specify sort of the larger material qualities, but also probably how it acts in society, through distribution networks, how it's thought of. It's an important book like a Rem Koolhaaf's book, but it's sassy like Teen Vogue, and it's kind of given as a gift at Christmas. Basically like now better than naked. So I think the relationship of predicting the object is a kind of curious one. I'm not sure I'm getting at your thing is kind of, your question's really interesting. What is the relationship of that?
We can continue that. That is a really interesting one at the bar. And I really want to just think that it's kind of philosophizing in the psychotherapy session. It's really great. I think that just answer questions really, really well. So we will continue on sparring the other rooms. But before we do that, please join me in thanking again Glen Cummings.